For those of you just joining us, thank you, thank you. We're just gonna give ourselves a couple more minutes to allow time for people to join, and then we'll kickstart here in a minute. Thanks. Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. For those of you who join us in the meantime, welcome. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is, I believe, our fourth community event under our new MEXA platform. And today we're focused on embedding lived experience. And we're really excited to sort of share insights from experts in this space. And so we'll kind of get going with that in a second. But to start, I wanted to give a sort of brief overview of what MEXA is. So we have teamed up at Neuromatch with the Wellcome Trust to build a new research community at the intersection of mental health and artificial intelligence. And our goal here is that we believe that through generating um, opportunities for collaboration within this intersection, that we can create real solutions for mental health by leveraging AI. And so we're delighted that you've decided to join us. Um, Please, we do encourage you, if you haven't already, to create a profile on the MEXA app at mexa.app. And in the next slide, I can show you why we think you should do this. So by joining the MEXA community, you get to participate in our community events, including webinars like today, hackathons, which we have planned and have already hosted one, and upcoming workshops. Um, there's a forum as part of being a part of MEXA, and there you can contribute to research forums, which are really helpful for sort of spearheading new research ideas or collaborations. And further than that, you can also match and partner with many other different types of scientists, developers, healthcare workers, lived experience experts, and community members who are part of the MEXA community there on the platform, sort of starting new collaborations globally. And finally, as by joining the MEXA sort of platform and community, you'll have access to exclusive funding calls that are coming up through Welcome, and including our upcoming MEXA Research Accelerator, which we will give you a little bit of an insight to at the end of today's session. But do look out for more information through our socials coming in the near future. So today, we're really delighted to host our next webinar on embedding lived experience. So we'll kickstart today with a talk on best practices for embedding lived experience from Kate, who will join us here in a second from the Wellcome Trust. And then we have a really great group of panelists to sort of deep dive into some questions and thoughts around this area about best practice of lived experience in your research. And then finally, at the end, my colleague Courtney will give us a little bit of an update on the next events that MEXA will be hosting, including future funding opportunities. Just a polite notice that we are using the Zoom webinar functions, so please do use the Q&A function to add some questions for our panel. And you can use the upvote aspect of this to basically like the questions that you think are most pertinent for today's discussions, and we'll hope to include those in the panel discussions. Um, if you need any tech support, feel free to direct message the host, but we'd also request that you just please be kind to each other and note that we are recording this event. So without further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Kate Martin from the Wellcome Trust, where she heads up the lived experience team and will give us a brief sort of overview of best practices on embedding lived experience. So over to you, Kate.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bradley. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm Kate Martin. I head up the lived experience team in Welcome's mental health program. Really delighted to be here talking to you all today. I think this is a really exciting area to be thinking about how we can advance lived experience. So great to have you all here. Great that we've got such a great panel. We can really get into some questions and discussions. But before that, briefly, what I'm going to do is talk about some of our work and some of the thinking around lived experience in mental health and AI research. So if we could go to the next slide, please. You're going to hear me say that quite a lot. Uh, so um, uh, why are we here? So I think if you think about lived experience involvement, community engagement, all the different terms, participation, involvement that we've heard about, in many areas of mental health science and research, collaboration with people with lived experience and communities is just the way that research is done and the way it's been done for many years. But what we know is that's far more embedded in areas that are more well established. So intervention research or service development research, areas where those projects, those research spaces, those areas are much closer to human experience. And so whilst that's kind of developed, established, what we know is that actually in newer areas, in more complex areas of mental health science and research, we're all still really learning what are the best ways to collaborate with people? What are the opportunities? How do we make sure this is meaningful, impactful, effective? And I think that's what's really exciting about coming together here as a community, lived experience experts and people from industry, researchers, to really grapple with these questions of what do we want to achieve? How do we advance the best innovations for people? How do we make sure they're the most suitable, adaptive? And how do we really bring together these different forms of expertise? And so that's partly really why Wellcome are really interested in this area. We know that the use of AI is advancing and advancing at a rapid pace in mental health, and in tools, interventions are being developed and much more prevalent. But we also know that this is in many ways uncharted territory. We're all learning together as a community. Much of this space is unregulated or currently unsupported by clinical evidence. And I suppose that presents all of us here with challenges as well as really kind of significant opportunities. So I guess we're really excited to think about at Wellcome, how can we make sure that AI can be used in mental health, whether that's around diagnosing people, look at prognosis, really supporting and advancing the effectiveness of therapies or new and improved interventions. And I suppose the core for us is really thinking, how do we reach the most people in the most effective way? And how do we make sure this is safe, this is ethical, that this is reaching the people, communities that we want to reach in the best and most effective way? And like the foundation for all our work, we genuinely believe that the best way to do that, and the only way of really making sure that we do that in the most effective ways, is by collaborating with lived experience experts. So we've been working with Neuromatch, obviously of launched MEXA, to really think about how do we bring these communities together around mental health and AI, and to really think about how do we really work better together as a community in this new and emerging field, and bringing together those different domains of expertise, whether that's researchers working in AI, in mental health, and critically, of course, also lived experience experts. I won't go through those events. Courtney will talk more about those, but they're just some of the things coming up you'll hear more about later on. So don't worry, there'll be more information about those shortly. So next slide, please. So first of all, probably helpful, this will be really obvious to some of you, maybe new to others, but probably just helpful to actually pause and think about, what do we even mean by lived experience and lived experience expertise? I think these are increasingly terms we hear used in the field of mental health. And I think often we use them, but without really pausing and think about, what are we actually talking about? So when we're talking about lived experience, I guess the first thing to say is, lived experience is one way of framing this, but many different forms of language are used. You might hear people being talked as peer researchers or experts by experience. Our term that we use most commonly is lived experience, but I don't think we should get too hung up on terms. Essentially, what we're talking about is people who have direct experience of living currently or previously with mental health challenges. And that we're talking about lived experience expertise. What we mean is the knowledge, insight, wisdom, expertise that is gained from having lived or living with those mental health challenges, but is not limited to that. And I suppose what I mean by that is, so often people with mental health challenges people with lived experience are, when they are involved, when they are brought into projects or to influence, often they're only really asked to share their personal experience, to share their personal perspective. And I think in many ways, whilst I say that's not to undermine that, I think that can be quite limiting. I think if you have lived or live with mental health challenges, you bring all sorts of other knowledge, ideas, expertise of not just your own experience, but of what it's like living in the world with mental health challenges, the opportunities, what would help improve people's lives, what are some of the barriers to accessing interventions, etc., etc. And so I suppose when we talk about expertise, what we're saying is we should be engaging with people for more than just their personal experiences. Actually, what we really want to engage people on and bring in is people's knowledge, insight, expertise alongside that. Um, so I guess just also helpful to clarify when we're talking about people with lived experience, as I said, it's people who perhaps currently or previously experiencing or living with mental health challenges. People don't need to have been diagnosed by professionals or accessed formal mental health services. We certainly encourage that people should self-identify as having mental health challenges, partly because so people's experiences don't have to be validated by an external system, but also because many people actually won't get the chance to have ever accessed services or professional diagnosis or treatments, etc. I just think here it's also helpful to reflect on the difference between people with lived experience and those who may be family members or supporters or in some way of people living with mental health challenges. I think often those two forms of knowledge can be conflated. They're both really important, but it's important to recognise what we're asking from people with lived experience and that knowledge and insight who should be able to speak, advocate for themselves and their own communities, and keeping that separate and distinct from the perspective, views, experiences, knowledge of carers, parents, supporters, others in the system. So I have my own lived experience of mental health challenges. I also have supported family members. I'm really conscious it's really important to keep those two forms of knowledge and expertise separate and distinct. So both important, but trying to keep them differentiated. Next slide, please. And so just a little bit about what we're doing at Welcome. So just as a very quick headline, Welcome's the mental health programme funds research projects to develop new and improved interventions for people living with anxiety, depression and psychosis to advance early intervention, to really make sure that we're intervening earlier to in more effective ways to make sure that people aren't held back by mental health problems. That's overall the work that we do. And really critically, we make sure that lived experience expertise is central to all of the work that we do. And that's broadly in three key areas. So firstly, we really want to make sure we're practicing what we preach. We want to make sure that the day-to-day work, thinking, decision-making, conversations, projects that we develop internally are all developed in collaboration with lived experience experts. One way of doing that, one main way, is we have a team of 17 lived experience advisors and consultants who are based, here we go, do the map in my head, who are based in the UK, South Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, India, Indonesia, Japan, and Australia. As you can imagine, that makes time zones for meetings pretty challenging, but we get there. But that team of experts really make sure that they work alongside all the colleagues in the mental health programme to brainstorm ideas, to develop projects, to make funding decisions. Essentially, whatever we do internally as a team, our lived experience advisors are a central part of that team as well, to make sure that that lived expertise is really embedded right from the foundations of our programme. Secondly, the other area is we make sure that all the projects, all the research and projects that we fund collaborate with people with lived experience and lived experience experts. And as I kind of alluded to before, in some areas, practice is really well established. In many areas of the research we fund, there are many years of approaches to develop the best methods, models of collaborating with lived experience experts in certain kinds of research. But actually, many of the areas that we fund, lived experience collaboration is really new. And whilst we understand the principles, we understand the key values, actually the practice is still evolving. We still don't know the best way, particularly in areas that are perhaps more basic science, more complex areas like computational sciences, AI, etc. we might understand the principles, the values, the ethos, but actually really how to embed that, the best ways of doing that in the most meaningful and effective way, we're still learning about as a community. And I think that's certainly presents some challenges, but it also, I think, is a really exciting part of the field to be in, to really think how we can advance lived experience expertise in new areas. And so it's great to be here with you all today, thinking actually you're all at the cutting edge of this. I think it's really exciting to think together about what opportunities there might be. And lastly, we're looking at how we seek to integrate lived experience expertise into the wider field of mental health science. So, how do we really understand best practices? How do we understand the impact? How do we learn and work alongside the people we fund to really understand the best ways to embed lived expertise? How can we make sure we're kind of supporting a bit of disruption in the system to really make sure that lived experience expertise is embedded as other forms of expertise are in the research ecosystem? So that's an overview of what we do. Yep, next slide, please. Thanks so much. And these are some, I guess, some of the basic principles that that we've developed. I think well known in the field that we've kind of pulled together with our lived experience experts that we sort of try to think through. Now, I suppose how these, whilst these principles I think are broad, I think they're really important. How they might apply, how they might be put together in different projects will vary. But these are some really helpful things I think to think of, some of which I've touched on already. So I think first and foremost, it's really important to remember that lived experience experts are completely distinct from research participants or user testers. So all those people have important roles in designing, developing projects or interventions, for example. But we just need to make sure that their roles are kept distinct, that we're not conflating or confusing a lived experience expert whose role is to be involved in the project team, to help plan projects, to oversee projects, to be part of a project delivery team, to really kind of bring that expertise in terms of developing, shaping, implementing projects. And that's distinct from the people that who are research participants or who are kind of user testers in that process. So all have their role, all have their place, but it's just really important to sort of differentiate that. And so as part of that, if we're thinking about lived experience experts as bringing expertise, knowledge, insight that's above and beyond just their personal stories or personal experiences, it's really important to remember that their role is there to set the direction, the governance, be involved in the design, delivery of the research or project, etc. And that we don't sort of reduce people to sort of asking people about their personal experiences. So it's sort of separating their personal experience from sort of knowledge, expertise, insight that can be informing the project in various ways. So in doing that, I suppose what follows from then is how do we then make sure that lived experience experts are kind of sort of seen, treated, set up as colleagues, and that their kind of input is valued and sought in the same way as it would any other member of the project team. Um, uh, Again, as I've touched on, I won't repeat this, but making sure that we are bringing in the right expertise for the right project. So if a project is design, if we need to get the knowledge, insight, expertise of carers, family members, others, because the intervention has some relevance to them, then fine. But we need to make sure that it's distinct from and not that people are not speaking on behalf of people with direct lived experience themselves. So just making sure we're like we're building any team, making sure we're bringing the right knowledge, expertise, perspectives. Similarly, again, one expert can't speak on behalf of multiple communities, multiple contexts. So again, thinking about who is our project for? What are we targeting? What knowledge, expertise, insight do we need? And making sure we have our diverse team of lived experience experts who will all bring different ideas, thoughts, perspectives, and contributions to shaping and developing that project. So really looking at what communities are you kind of researching with? Who are the tools, for example, who are we developing them for? And really trying to draw in that knowledge, insight, expertise that's relevant from those communities and perspectives. Uh, it goes without saying, I hope, but I think it's still helpful to remind us that we should be making sure that in all our projects we are budgeting and compensating people who provide lived experience expertise. I think for all too often people are expected to do this work for minimal or no pay, and I think we're really trying to make sure that people are paid, compensated appropriately for their time, and certainly that's a prerequisite of all the work that we fund. Next slide, please. I suppose as well as working with individual experts, one way to really kind of meaningfully collaborate with people is by collaborating with organisations in the community. As well as sometimes having embedded experts in teams or on steering groups or projects oversight groups, etc., can also be really helpful to develop relationships with community organisations or networks who can kind of be a partner within a project to make sure that multiple different perspectives are being brought in, that we're really kind of making sure there are diverse perspectives in the kind of the design development of projects. Again, like we would with any colleague, trying to think about how we're making sure that we're upskilling lived experience experts. How do you make sure that that we are seeing lived experience as the starting point, not end point for recruitment? So, for example, when we recruit our lived experience experts at Welcome, of course, lived experience expertise is the foundation, that's the starting point. But we are a complex global scientific mental health research program. We also need people who have the interest, the desire, the ability uh, to advise on a project such as ours. So, as well as lived experience expertise, we also look for other skills, interest in mental health research, not necessarily experience, but certainly ability and interest in being able to engage with the different areas of work we do, whether that's research or the policy side, whatever that might be. But making sure, as well as lived experience expertise, people also have a range of other skills and forms of expertise they can come and contribute to the work that we're doing together. And I guess one thing that we've really learned over time, particularly in areas such as this, right, particularly in it's a complex global funding program. In some of the areas of research that we fund are complex in their nature. Um, there are no clear pathways really for some of the work we're doing. As I said earlier, we might know the principles of good collaboration, we might know what good, meaningful involvement looks like, but how we then translate that in some more complex areas, such as AI, such as data sciences, neurosciences, or in complex mental health global funding programs like ours, how those principles are applied really vary. We're all forging the way here. So I suppose we've really learned to think about, and I think one of the most effective things that we've done really is learn to think about how do we learn while doing? How do we really make sure we are working in an iterative and reflective way so that we are testing out ways of working, pausing, reflecting what's going well, what do we need to change or improve, and that continually improves the way that we are all working together to embed lived experience expertise. And finally, just thinking about how we make sure that lived experience experts are kind of acknowledged for their contributions, whether that's co-applicants on applications or naming people as co-author, people being co-authors on outputs papers, etc., etc. So just really making sure that people are both involved meaningfully in the projects, but also in terms of the outputs and the impact that's coming from those. Okay, next slide, please. I won't go through all these, but I guess when we are looking at what good involvement looks like, what we tend to see is, are people involved, are lived experience experts involved in multiple ways, in multiple roles, as you would look for with any team? So people are contributing, are people being, people's expertise being brought in the kind of most effective, most meaningful ways? But also a really good signal of meaningful involvement is, are people involved at multiple stages of a project? And does that involvement match the stage or the aim of that point of the project so that people are meaningfully contributing? I think this is important to break down, partly because what we often see is that lived experience experts are often only brought in at the end, so either in terms of user testing or dissemination, and I think that's really limiting. What we're really looking at is, well, how are people involved in shaping the idea in the first place? How are people involved in the project oversight and decision making? How are people involved in different aspects of the implementation, or whether that's data collection or testing, whatever that might be? But when we see good, when we can understand what good looks like, it's that people are involved in multiple ways. They are being worked with as experts, and they're involved in multiple stages of the project, and that their involvement, the methods of involvement, the methods of collaboration vary so that they match the kind of aim and stage of the project at hand. So that's kind of what we tend to look at, and we've kind of learnt will kind of work best to make sure that people are, and that collaboration is meaningful. Next slide, please. I'm nearly there. Just one example. Actually, there's some amazing examples out there. I think people are really some amazing projects out there that are really forging the way in terms of demonstrating what kind of meaningful collaboration looks like. This is just one example, the Mindkind study that we funded a few years ago, which was we commissioned Mindkind, who worked across the UK, India, and South Africa, and we're looking at in the development of a data bank for young people to contribute data to kind of understand how mental health changes over time, what helps, etc. One of the things we really wanted to look at was the feasibility of that. And to do that, we needed to understand what would most enable, encourage young people to share their data and to stay engaged in sharing their data over time. And one aspect of that project was looking at a randomized control trial to understand different kinds of um, data governance models. And a really great example here of lived experience involvement was added a real kind of nuance to the trial. So there was three strands with three different data governance models, sort of three arms of the trial for each of those three different data governance models. But the young people themselves were like, those three are really valid, really important that we test those out. But actually, one of the fundamental things is that we think will really make a difference. We want to test out in that trial is the concept of choice, not just what's the impact of those three different models, but does having the choice about which data governance model you choose make you more or less likely to engage and how? So that was a sort of fourth arm that was added onto the trial. And really what that then found was through that was that it was sort of choice and trust that actually was the main driver rather than the actual sort of particular kind of data stewardship in and of itself. So again, a really nice example. You can read more there. There's a link there. I think we'll send these slides around. You'll be able to see more. But again, some really good learning there about in a kind of a complex, large scale data program, how lived experience expertise really was brought in really effectively and meaningfully to shape and improve the approaches on offer. Next slide, please. So I can take a breath now and pause there. Please do, as we go through, as we've mentioned, please do put your questions in the chat. But without further ado, I'd really like to welcome our amazing panel to join me on screen now, please. Here we go. Great. Excellent entrance there, Teresa. Perfect. 10 out of 10. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really glad that I can now leave you guys to do most of the talking after that whistle-stop tour of some of the work we do and some of the challenges we know in the field. But thank you so much for joining us. I know we've got loads of questions to get through, and I'm sure we'll have even more from the people who are listening in. But first of all, if we could just go around and if you could just give sort of both briefly introduce yourself, but also just say briefly about your connection, I suppose, to mental health lived experience and research in this space. I would like to start with Chan.
Hi everyone, I'm Chan. I'm assistant professor at Cornell University. I'm a human AI interaction researcher. My connection with folks with lived experience of mental health and AI is really in thinking about how to build systems that people can use every day, whether it's LLM journaling tools or chatbots. But those tools can actually make these tools useful for clinical practice and for clinical care later on in the journey. I also do a lot of work around young adults, emerging adults, mental health. So work with folks and parents and schools and those young folks themselves in designing systems for everyday mental wellness care. Very excited to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll now pass on to Joy.
Hi everyone, I'm Joy Moher, a global mental health researcher and coordinator of the Mental Health Innovation Network. And at MHIN, we are a community of mental health innovators sharing innovative resources and ideas to promote mental health and improve the lives of people with mental, neurological, and substance use disorders. And in doing so, we ensure that we highlight the voices and the work of persons with lived experience. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa. I am the Chief Research Officer at Mental Health America. I had my first panic attack at 7 years old and struggled with suicidal thoughts by 11. I come from a family of depression, anxiety, substance use, psychosis. And so MHA, lived experience is really core to our work. We are lived experience first and kind of our profession second, and that drives our policy and our research and the tools that we create and try to provide for free to help people who are most likely struggling with mental health conditions when they're young and searching online for digital resources that they can use on their own. I'm happy to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Ian.
Well, thanks, Kate. Kate, I'm Ian Buttermore. I work as a research consultant on my own and with groups as I'm thinking, and I have a lived experience. I started out as a basic health researcher too many decades ago to think about. And my career has been constantly shifting towards the social, towards the personal, towards the political, and all of those things that really matter in getting the science done, like lived experience. And so I have that personal lived experience, I have the lived experience of mental distress and of suicide of people around me and personally myself. And I was one of three authors who were commissioned by Wellcome by Kate and crew last year to write a report, How Lived Experience Shapes Digital Mental Health Research and Development. And we'll talk a bit about that, but that's, I think, been useful for us. And I've been looking at this AI topic and realizing there's so much more and so much more even that's happened since we wrote that report last year. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And already you've thrown up, both, all of you in your introduction, some really important points I know we're going to delve into more. Particularly want to pick up on, though, is about how sort of our identities as people. Teresa, you said really nicely there about how actually your organisation is kind of lived experience first now, kind of, our professional identities second. And I suppose to acknowledge for us as a panel, as well as for all the people listening in on this call, when we talk about lived experience experts, there are some people who work as dedicated lived experience experts, but there are many of us working in this field who have sort of professional identities, but also consciously bring lived experience in to form our work. But also, I think the third group often gets under acknowledged, which is there are many people working in this space who are driven by personal experience, whether that's their own or their families, and may not use that in an open way, but certainly we know that many people are still existing in this space. So there are many of us, I think many more of us with lived experience than is often understood. So just to kind of recognise that there's all those kind of different roles or different identities, I think, around lived experience, and that kind of informs and enriches the work in sort of different ways, which kind of leads me on to the first question. And Ian, you went last, but not this time. So over to you if it's all right for this first question. So just to think, would you talk us a bit more about why do you think it's essential to embed lived experience expertise in mental health, and particularly in kind of AI research?
Thanks, Kate. There are multiple answers that people might have as to why they're driven to do this work or why they might think it's important. So I'm just going to focus really on two, I think, which is the carrot and the stick. And to me, the carrot, the reason that there's the opportunity is that if you have lived experience, if been working in these sectors, so much of what we're doing at the current time or trying to do is not really delivering. We're really looking for new solutions. It's not all about just not having enough capacity. It's actually that the solutions and supports we have at the present time often don't meet the need of people with lived experience. And the other side to that, and we do have to balance that, I think, in this discussion specifically around AI, is that much of probably what we're going to do in AI is either not going to work. It's really difficult to put a pin in and say this is going to be the thing that's going to work in the next 5 years. But we've got to try, and we've got to have that optimism. And some of it may do harm. And so I think by involving the lived experience perspectives, we both increase the opportunity for getting the success, and I believe that we reduce the chances of identifying harm early, and of minimizing those things which we are understandably concerned about as communities. I don't know what other people think.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. You've really made me think there. Often what I hear is people saying, rather than having to justify the need to bring in lived experience expertise, I almost think why wouldn't we? In that whenever we're building a team, we really want to make sure we've got all the right perspectives, ideas, forms of expertise around the table, because we're going to make the most informed projects, most informed. We're going to have the most rich discussions, and if we don't bring in that lived experience perspective, we're just missing a really key perspective and a really key chunk, and that will just mean we're kind of perhaps sometimes things are just a bit mismatched or not as kind of well-rounded as they could be. Same question to you, Chan, if that's all right. So why do you think, from your perspective, it's essential to embed lived experience expertise, particularly in this area of research?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I echo everything Ian just said, wonderfully spoken. I think I'll add a bit more perspective from a technologist, kind of a technology research angle. Um, I think we tend to forget that as researchers, we're fascinated by the most cutting edge technology, like, oh, LLM, today there's LLM, tomorrow there's probably something else. But I think we tend to forget that a lot of the times people on the ground, people with lived mental health experience, they need very basic things. They need access to certain basic level of care. They want FaceTime with health providers, not just through a chatbot or a digital system. So I think it's for me as a technologist, it's really valuable to stay connected with folks with lived experiences to just help keep us grounded, to know that AI is such a sort of cherry on top of a lot of the things we do, not the first step, I think, for a lot of folks.
You just reminded me actually of a discussion we had, and I think it's often something that comes up is about how I think people are often there's often these. I think a genuine collaboration can really help overcome some of the assumptions, and particularly actually, I think some of the paternalistic assumptions that exist out there. So often, I think we hear people say, "Well, oh no, people with lived experience wouldn't want that. They'll find it too intrusive, or people don't want this, people don't want that." And actually, until we get out there and really understand from people, often people, it's not about saying to people, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is this approach good or bad? It's like, who is it relevant for? How do you make it the most effective? What are the things we need to avoid? How do you make it ethical? So it's more about refining, as you were saying, Ian, making it the most meaningful, the most ethical that we can, rather than. So I think it can take us away from these binaries and understand the nuance, the richness, the depth of things that we need to be able to explore together. I'm going to sort of shift us on slightly. So similar question, but not too dissimilar. And Teresa and Joy, I'm going to come to you for this one, but feel free to answer any of the last question you want to as well. But I suppose we're thinking about why, so we've heard something about why this is so critical, but what does good look like to you? Like, what does authentic, meaningful engagement look like to you? And like, I don't know if you've got an example of when this is done well, or, I mean, also helpful sometimes to know when it hasn't been done well. It's always helpful to know what to avoid as well as what to do. So, Joy, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with, I believe authentic and meaningful engagement. For example, in research should be done through co-production, and this is where the researchers, the practitioners, the persons with lived experience together undertake a research project. But this is in sharing power and responsibility at all stages through equitable remuneration. And so this entails co-planning, co-design, co-delivery, and co-evaluation. So they're involved from the beginning to the end of the project. And also in doing so, ensuring reasonable accommodation for the persons with lived experience, understanding there's somewhat different stages of their recovery. So to ensure that, we cater to that as well. An example I will give is the Succeed Africa project, which is an international research consortium taking a bottom-up approach to investigate what works for people with psychosis in their communities. And Succeed basically stands for the supporting comprehensive care and empowerment for people with psychosocial disability in Africa. And this is conducted in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Sierra Leone. And peer researchers across the 4 countries are meaningfully involved throughout the project. And that is one example of a research project that is doing co-production well. Thank you.
Brilliant. If you could put a link to that in the chat, I think, because I'm sure people would really like to read more about that. But again, that goes back to, doesn't it, that kind of, when we understand what meaningful, genuine collaboration, it's about both equitable power and decision making, equitable pay, making sure that people are seen as colleagues in a team, as well as making sure people are collaborating throughout. And I think what's often interesting in projects when you're kind of really unpicking if something's meaningful or not, something I think we've seen over the years is, are people involved not just in the easy aspects, are they involved in the difficult conversations? Like I think people often, it's like, how do we problem solve together? I think that's when the real rich kind of genuine collaboration comes in, right? How are we not just deciding what we're going to do, but how do we solve problems together, grapple with the issues that arise, and really think together in those ways? I think that's sometimes I think where the real sparks of real innovation has come. Teresa, same question for you. What does authentic, meaningful engagement mean to you? And any examples of when it's gone well or not well?
Yeah. Um, and just to note that when we include people with lived experience, I think we also ultimately create better product, right? Like I think in mental health, because of the shame and fear associated with mental health conditions, especially if you're a voice hearer, you don't really, I think that we become siloed in systems and people don't know what it means to live, regularly with voice hearing or perceptual abnormalities or panic attacks in the middle of work days. And so when you create tools with lived experience, I find that it actually creates efficiency because I'm creating a better tool and I work in creating digital tools. So really like if you're going to capture the mind and attention of a 12-year-old who is negotiating these issues, you don't have time to kind of waste on a tool that might not work, right? Not just on their life, because we need to ensure that they're going to get recovery when they need it. So you want to create a product that really is meaningful, and I often find that we can only do that with lived experience, and you can only do that with authentic engagement. And so, in the early days of MHA being involved in research, I will say like we were often invited to be advisors, for example, but this meant that I was meeting with the research team 4 times a year. And I will promise you, even today, when I do that with the research projects that I might have reviewed, you know, the proposal, wrote a letter of support for that team. By the time I got into the first half of the second year, even, I'm not sure I understand what's happening as an advisor, even, right? Certainly not the day to day. So meaningful involvement has really shifted for our team. We now request that if we're going to be on a team, it means it's like thank you to welcome to say, the value is also in the funding because you can only do that. I get that as researchers. You can only do that if you have funding set aside to ensure that the teams that are involved are equitably included financially. And that what that translates to us though is that I'm sitting in meetings weekly with my research teams. I have a peer team of 12 people. They are coding for me. They are asked, what does training look like? If they're going to do the work, then they're absolutely actually interested in the implications of the work and have a lot of important thoughts about what it means and what they see and what they can do, what they do on the ground and how that translates to what's translatable and important from a research standpoint, like what is dissemination of knowledge look like, but also I will just end on the most important thing is like systems transformation. So when you have a person who has lived experience and they bring like, I know what it is to live in poverty. I know what it is to negotiate my depression, and I cannot get my meds, and so I'm turning to this other system, or I've been legally involved in systems, and what does it mean to kind of be in a desert and not know where to get help? These things have been really impactful when you move from research into where I think we really kind of want to go, where the meat of the best parts of research help us to translate and change and transform our system. And that's been really like really fun and important to kind of connect these three arms all together.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that jumped out from what you've both been saying about going back to what we were saying earlier about real involvement is involvement at multiple stages. And there's something that really astounds me. I don't know why we do it or where it came from, but when we're planning any team, any project, we think, what's the project doing? What's the stage? Who do we need? How do we need to work together to best achieve that aim? And that will change as the project changes. But then we automatically, when we go to thinking about collaborating with people with lived experience, we go, we'll have a steering group that meets 4 times a year. And it's not to say this is not me knocking steering groups, right? They have a role, they have a place, but it's got to be clearly defined. What's that role and purpose for? It's very limited. It's about governance. It's about strategic direction, decision making. You cannot be involved day to day in meaningfully shaping a project if you meet 4 times a year, and that's not the way we plan any other team. And it's like, I think if the one message or one of the messages we can really get out today is, don't start with the method of involvement, which is what we tend to do. Start with, what is the project doing? What are we needing to do as a team? What are we trying to aim for? How's that going to grow and evolve? And then how do we need to collaborate together as a team to achieve that? And almost forget about the methods of collaboration to start with and really think about what and how. And the other thing that just jumped out there was about that. I think the more we embed lived experience in the day-to-day working teams, the more inclusive those teams are for all researchers who may also have lived experience. We've had so many researchers coming to us through the calls that we've put out, saying that because the funding's been there, the systems have been there, the lived experience is being positioned as expertise, that researchers who've been working with colleagues for 10, 15 years are finally being able to talk to their own colleagues about their own lived experience. Because I think there's, again, a huge stigma in research about people being concerned that if they talk about being a researcher and having lived experience, will people think they're not objective anymore? Will people, there's all these kind of connotations and stigmatizations. I think we can create more inclusive, better ways of working to bring in lived experience experts. And that's why it also makes it more an inclusive, open team for any researcher with a personal lived experience as well, to be able to kind of really collaborate more meaningfully. So a nice example there of how it doesn't work, as well as how it can do. Just before we move on to the next question, Ian, Chan, I just wondered if any examples you had about when things have worked well or not worked well, before I hop on to the next question.
Not right now. I might mention a couple of things later.
Perfect. Okay, right, on to the next question then. So we thought about why I want to do this. We've thought about what meaningful engagement can look like. But I suppose to try and take that down another, we've already touched on some of this, actually, some of the practical steps. But I suppose, what other practical steps can researchers take to really ensure that the expertise of people with lived experience are not just tokenized, but really genuinely brought into the research process? So we've heard some of that from some of the answers that you've both given. But Ian, if I can come to you on this one, like, what practically can people do to really make sure that expertise is embedded and integrated?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I think some of this came out through the review that we did last year, and it also comes out from my own experience of working with different groups. And I think that you mentioned in your slides, you need a set of principles, the frameworks which are appropriate to the environment you're working in. And the reason I'm not being specific in that is that will depend upon the type of science area that you're working in. So for some people, it will be co-design or co-production. For some people, they might look at human-centered design. For some people, it might be more of a community participation, action research type of framework that they would take on. But once you begin to look at what is the set of principles, or is there a framework that's out there, and some research organizations do have specific frameworks for working in the digital mental health space. We're seeing more of that. So, grow your awareness of what is out there and is appropriate to the space in which you're working, and then develop a plan from that. And that plan needs to be across the research journey. I think the key part, which I was sort of going to add to what you were talking about before, is where are we starting? And I think that is, when we looked at the 100 or so papers which were able, people that we spoke to in the grey literature we looked at last year, wasn't actually that much material out there that's published, that's in the public domain about how this is happening. I'm sure that there are really interesting things that are out there that's not published. But in the AI space, it's really tiny, to be honest, if you look at what's out there, because the space is new. So we need to start in a space where we're coming from some of those principles, and we're looking at things like, who's being recruited in? I'll give you a touchstone for me would be, are you actually engaging with people who have suicidal experience, may have current suicidal experience, or may have experience of what we call more enduring or significant mental health disorders? Or are you excluding them from the outset of your research because you're worried about how you're going to engage with them. We're seeing that in these chatbots at the present time. If you go to a chatbot, these conversational chatbots we're seeing, and you say the wrong things, it says you need to go and call a support line. Now that is not a person-centered. That's not an authentic lived. If you were working with lived experience, we wouldn't be seeing that, which I think is a fundamental flaw in some of those chatbots at the present time. I could go on. I'm beginning to get activated, but I'm interested in what other people I've got to say.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I think you're really right there. Like, I think these are sometimes aspects that people can be frightened of, like, oh, but let's not. But actually, they're the real opportunities to collaborate with lived experience experts, right? To
And
really grapple with these tricky,
no,
difficult that exist out there in the world. But actually, the
and
more we can bring together those forms of expertise, the more we're going to find a more effective solution that is more inclusive, that works for more people.
so can I add a tiny bit to that, which is just being more solution focused on how people can do that, which is in this early engagement, which is what I'm really encouraging, and you're looking at maybe peer groups or other people that are out there who have lived experience leadership. Who can I talk to? How to design this work? And there are things like intentional peer support. There might be training which you do within your group, such that you understand how you're going to interact safely and authentically with people with lived experience as you go through this journey together. And one of the things which I think is going to be important to doing this authentically and clearly is that you're able to talk about that and how you made decisions, how you took on advice, maybe how you found things challenging, but how have you gone through the process? How are you using that advice as you go through your project? And if you're not touching on the tricky conversations that you've said, I'm not sure that you're getting the value, because that's the value of the lived experience, is to touch on the tricky conversations at that early stage with people who've been there, who are there right now.
Yeah. So I guess just to reiterate that call, I suppose that this is an area we know, as I say, we know very little about what the best practices, methods, models around collaboration look like. If I could encourage everybody listening to, whether it's a blog or a formal article, it doesn't really matter, but get out there your learning around collaboration, because so much learning we see, so much inspiration for others we see is someone seeing teams working in a similar field to them, talking about what they've done to collaborate with people with lived experience, and other people going, oh, well, now I know how I could do that. So please talk to your colleagues, talk to other teams, establish collaborations so we can learn from each other, because I think that's really the way we're going to advance practice in this field. And as you're saying, in that real learning by doing, there's no perfect. We need to try a way of working out what worked, what didn't. Let's reiterate, let's refine, let's improve, try again. And I think that iterative working is really how we get the best ways of collaboration, and also not afraid to get things wrong. So I think certainly some of the best ways of collaborating that I've learned over the years are by trying something out, it probably not working the best it could, and just learning from that and trying something different. But you've got to have the kind of the shared values, the belief that it's worth trying something in it and getting it wrong than it is to do nothing at all. And that's really how I think we learn the most effectively. Joy, over to you if that's all right. I suppose similar question, like what are the practical steps can researchers and lived experience take to collaborate better together to really make sure that expertise is all sort of authentically integrated?
Thank you, Kate. So just adding on to what Ian has said, he's talked about training and basically ensuring there's the mutual capacity building and strengthening of the person with lived experience. Because many a time people say that they may not have the information, but that's how there's this you can create capacity building sessions to bring them up to speed on levels that you may feel need to be enhanced. And additionally is to challenge knowledge production hierarchies, because these hierarchies are what bring the differences and like their voices being left out. So we have to challenge these hierarchies and bring them on as equitable partners in this with co-production, or in if it is be it in a panel or in a board, their voice matters just as much as everyone else on that platform. And then ensuring flexible ways of interacting and working with great reflexivity, and then also adequate remuneration to avoid the tokenistic involvement, which is frequently used, as we all know. And then also ensuring there are safeguarding policies in place so that they're able to know if any problem arises, what can they do, what is in place to safeguard them. And I think these are really important elements that people can take into consideration. Thank you.
Really helpful. Again, that importance of that iterative learning and improvement, and all that remuneration. I think is a really critical one to make sure that people's expertise is being valued, as it is for all other sort of team members, and those safeguards, those inclusive ways, those kind of safer practices, those ethical ways of working together. Again, really important that they're embedded in the approach of teams. So thanks so much for that. So just moving on then, I think we've touched on some of these, but I suppose what are some of the challenges in kind of being able to kind of create that collaboration, foster that collaboration between researchers in this space and lived experience experts, and how they've been addressed? And Chan, if I could come to you first on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so many challenges. Where to start? One thing I would point out, maybe I'll start with an example. So, one of the projects we did last year was to try to imagine what the future of everyday AI enhancing mental health care look like. What's the future today? Like Apple Watch and Fitbit can diagnose your mental. I can give you a mental health diagnosis, and it's based on your everyday behavioral data. That diagnosis, of course, has its value, but it's also limited in many ways. How can we actually make use of that in improving people's well-being concretely? We interviewed physicians. We talked with a lot of folks with mental health experiences, whether with or without diagnosis. We talk to policymakers, startup founders, VCs investing in those companies. And the learning from that is really, sadly, the the lived experience of patients or future patients don't matter as much because the power is so much in people who set insurance reimbursement policies, the hospital systems who decide to take on certain type of patients or not. So a lot of the great technologies are designed for only out-of-pocket kind of patients who can pay for their healthcare themselves. I want to bring this example because, yes, it is so important to embrace the perspectives of people with lived experience, but I think we also want to be realistic about what's their role in this larger ecosystem. And in order to advocate for their interests, what kind of barriers and the kind of real world constraints we're dealing with. And I think that's incredibly important. So in our research projects nowadays, when we design a new system, when we design a new, let's say, AI chatbot, that you happen to mention, we talk to health policy folks like, hey, how would this play out in a policy setting? Is it realistic to potentially build this for Medicare, Medicaid, for national health insurance programs? What it will look like from an investor's perspective? Will this product have real world feasibility in this like commercial capitalist world? So to me, the challenge and the solution we're kind of exploring is really to think about people's lived experience in this the context of this larger world, and think about how can we actually advocate and deliver outcome for them.
Yeah. I think it just shows the complexity of the system we're working in. So not only the projects we're designing, developing, and grappling with, but also how do we make sure they become out there in the real world, and all the kind of other challenges that we need to take account of and grapple with together to really make sure they become sort of effective in people's lives. So it's a brilliant example to bring. Thank you, Chan. So just another question. So how has kind of lived experience collaboration shaped or changed any research outcomes or methodologies or perspectives of some of the projects you've been working on? And Teresa, if I could come to you on that one, that'd be great.
Yes. Gosh, there's so much as well. So, Ian, I really appreciate your question about suicide because I think if you just sit on that example, I think that you see this quite often, right? So when you think about suicide, and in the early days of our work, and certainly working with researchers who had not embedded lived experience, you are going to take a kind of either what you were trained to do, which is like put the red box, take a legal fear-based approach. And in that topic alone, embedding lived experience really expands a topic, right? So how has it shaped the outcomes? I think it really gives nuance to what lived experience really even means. We have these clinical terms like depression or psychosis or schizophrenia, but what does that mean to me as somebody who lives with this? So I struggle with suicidal thoughts. Many of our users come in enormously distressed, saying things like, I want to kill myself. There's nothing you can do to convince me otherwise. And then for us, though, we're not afraid of that, right? So as to help you in negotiating the ethical concerns and building quality resources for people, it's like to say, let's give you a framework to not approach this with fear, but approach something with curiosity, which I think is a strength of research. And to create something that's meaningful for folks means, hey, look, we're actually going to share about the whole spectrum of how suicidal ideation might start. What does that look like? What do I need in this moment to de-escalate the concerns? How do I talk about the triggers that occur and what that implication means and not jump straight to a safety plan, for example? And then even when I get to a safety plan, what does a meaningful safety plan looks like? Many times the tools that we create are created in a research vacuum, but they're used by humans. By the time they're used by us as humans, they don't, even in a clinical setting, they often don't look like the way that they were published, right, in papers. And I think when you bring lived experience to that table from the very offset, you're going to talk about what is it that you're doing? How do I build this in the best way that's possible? And why, for example, it's important. Why is that meaningful? And answering those questions actually help us to create better services for folks. And I do think that having lived experience helps to change that from the start, right? That is I mean, I would say also just like in a really beautiful approach because it's really much more comprehensive and then I think exciting for the research team. And then by the end, you feel really proud of the product you created because you can see the impact for people in their lives and the way they're using them.
I think that example really nicely ties together things that you've all said actually about let's approach this not with fear but with curiosity, that we should be engaging with people with the right knowledge, experience, expertise. And some of that can feel more challenging for researchers to sort of think, where do I start? I really want to engage people. I really want to bring in people's expertise, but this is, I don't even know where to start. But that's why organizations such as your Teresa, why it isn't just going to speak to lived experience experts, it's planning that approach with lived experience experts who will be much more cognizant of how do we approach this in the most meaningful way? How do we frame that conversation with support, with interest rather than fear? How do we make sure, Joy, as you were saying, that we've got the right uh, ethos, inclusive atmosphere, the right safeguarding approach in place that supports and encourages those conversations to happen rather than perhaps closing them down. And I think often people think, and there is a question in the chat actually I've noticed, which we will come back to later on, but I'm just reflecting back on, which is how we can kind of the different methods we can engage people with, or the different ways, sort of different roles people can come in on. And I think there's a real role here to say there are there are a whole host of kind of organizations or experts out there who can work alongside researchers to think about how we really effectively have some of these conversations, particularly where they might feel more challenging or where we need to perhaps think about them in a more sensitive and detailed way. So we don't, it's not just we're sort of saying to research teams, go off and do this yourself. There are organizations like yours, Teresa, and others who can really help think that through and be that kind of, whether that's a facilitator or a bridge or a collaboration with another organization, can really bring in those voices and that expertise in various ways. So I think it's not if we do it, but how we do it. But I think there's multiple ways sort of we can approach that, and to do that with lived experience, collaborating in the design of that, I think is probably the best way. Um, Chan, just back to you if that's all right. Just any examples you've got about how embedding lived expertise has sort of changed any research outcomes or approaches, methodologies, and perspectives, and some of your work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my experience is mostly in building AI solutions to a lot of problems. I think one thing that I've learned over the years is really to not assume AI is the solution. Like when we engage various kinds of stakeholders, um, we always sort of check on ourselves, like, is it okay for people to say, no, this project is unnecessary, don't do it. Like, I think that's a sort of good limit test to see how much power, how meaningfully are we actually giving voice to people. Um, and also, okay, you mentioned in a very early, earlier in this conversation that those engaging with people with lived experiences are not just treating them as user testers, and absolutely agree. But my experience is also like it is important to have people test out the system because it's easy to fall into a conversation but not deliver the output, especially when it comes to AI systems. So many of the design decisions nonetheless still fall on the researchers. We still need to do a lot of the implementation and make nuanced choices. So sort of marrying this early
Mm.
engagement co-design role and the user testing, evaluation, even policy design role, to me is very important in our projects.
Yeah, 100%. And I completely agree with you. And I think we need, like with any team, we need all of those. We need multiple approaches. We need people to think critically about what are we doing? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we thinking about this in the most well-rounded, thoughtful way that we can? Are we setting off well? And then we'll need people to test what we're doing with. Is this working in the way that's intended? But they're different people and they're different roles. And it's about making sure we have the right knowledge, the right expertise, the right input at different times. And I think the more we kind of try and broaden our thinking out. So rather than just having the one advisory group, as you were saying, Teresa, like, yes, that has a role, that has a place, but that's one role, one function. How do we get co-researchers? How do we get yeah, peer researchers, co-researchers? How do we get people who are going to test out ideas with us or brainstorm ideas? People are going to think about the ethical concerns. There are so many different aspects to this that we can't just be engaging with one person in one way. We need the right people for the right stage at the right time. So that moves us on then to thinking about, so what next? What about what's the future? Where are we heading with this? So Ian, I'm going to come to you for this one if that's all right. I'm asking you if it's all right before I've even told you the question. So there we go. So in this kind of rapidly evolving field of AI, what opportunities do you see for lived experience to play a transformative role in this area of research? Like where do you think the real opportunities are?
First time I've done that in ages. I liked what Therese was saying about let's think about the type of research and develop activity that we've currently got or likely got on the cards around artificial intelligence and mental health. And I think there are gaps there. And I think that people with lived experience can contribute to really filling those gaps and um, building solutions, some of which may work, not many of them, but we need that diversity and we need to have that optimism. But building solutions which are not all based upon those commercial models or based upon, let's say, the capitalist system where we're considering the diversity of populations. And so what I think we need to reach my utopia of, some more useful, more directly relevant artificial intelligent solutions is to involve people early. And I'm seeing little bits of that, but really not that much. So we saw, I think, one thing in our review, and I've seen a couple of things in the last couple of months, very small studies looking at the diversity of communities and their attitudes towards using AI in digital mental health. So I think there's a big space there. And to do that, I reckon we need to be collaborating. This can't be data that we hang on to that doesn't go into the public domain. So this is where, the beauty of Welcome and MEXA and the sort of things that you're doing is we need to build up that understanding of the diversity of opportunities and risks with different communities that they see, and then work with them. Don't just leave it there, but work with them going all the way through. So I'm optimistic, but I think it's not quite happening yet. So we need an accelerator. That's what we need. We need an accelerator.
Right, we've solved it. There we go. But you're right. I think this is a really pivotal moment, right? We're starting to see it happening. We know people are up for it, but like as we've seen some of the questions in the chat and some of the discussions we're having, we're at this point where we're trying to figure this out together, and I think that presents real excitement, real opportunity. But I guess that's it, is trying to get that momentum going, isn't it? And trying to capture that learning as we're going so that we can kind of snowball that kind of excitement, snowball that develop that practice as we go. So next question. What bit of advice would you give to organizations, institutions looking to prioritize lived experience in their work, including how they might sort of initiate, if you've never done this before, how might you even start to build relationships with lived experience experts? So, Joy, I might come to you first, and then Chan, I'll come to you after.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'll start by saying that they need to ensure that every voice is heard and every story is valued. So in engaging persons with lived experience, it's important to build that relationship, have communication with them, and also ensure that even before you engage them, ensure that there's some baselines that are in place, that you've already ensured that there'll be remuneration, you have at least some safeguarding policies. Of course, this can be modified once they come on board because they will definitely add elements that they think you may have missed. And also ensuring reasonable accommodation. We find that many people, you will bring them on board, but then you feel like you've ticked a box and then you kind of leave it at that. But we need to remember that these are people like me and you, and they are, some of them are in different points of their recovery journey. So we also still need to ensure that they're prioritizing their mental health so that you're not just using them and then after that project, you don't care what happens to them, right? So ensuring reasonable accommodation throughout the process so that they're also okay, even while you're engaging them, ensuring that they're also ensuring that they continue to prioritize their mental health while working, as should be for, for all. Mental health in the workplace is important, but let's not forget those key elements.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you really hit something there for me about so that people are often brought in for a project and then they're gone again. And I think, if you look at research institutions, and I mean that in their broadest sense, all the organizations that we're all working in, you can walk down the corridor and find all sorts of different experts who are there all of the time, who are just part of that organization. Lived experience experts still seem to be the ones that are brought in and out for project by project. And I guess we're really interested at Welcome and with our partners to think about what can we do to make sure that lived experience expertise becomes embedded in the fabric of organizations, that we have embedded lived experience roles in organizations, not just project by project. Now, of course, you might need specific people to come on board on a project like we would with any, but really making sure, I think, that we're trying to think about how, as organizations, teams, are we embedding lived experience expertise as a normal everyday part of those teams and not just project by project. I think is a huge step forward that we could make. Chan, same to you. What advice would you give organizations to get going?
Yeah, I actually will just echo what you guys just said. It's so beautifully said. I think my advice would be like start today and start small. By starting today, I meant I actually personally don't think the best timing to collaborate seek this sort of collaboration is at a grant writing time.
Yeah.
It sets you up for so many constraints and your mind is sort of not in the right place to begin with. So start today, start to talk to someone. Doesn't need to be, like official collaboration with some large organization. It can really just be today talking to someone, tomorrow build a relationship with another person. I find it works so much better, both for understanding the person and also for the research itself.
Yeah, I really echo that. I think it's a really important point, is that I think sometimes people feel overwhelmed not knowing where to start and they want to do it all in one go. And it's like, actually, if we just wait for the next project, again, it's already too late. Let's just start by having one conversation, trying to think of one collaboration and trying to build and evolve that. And that, I think it naturally just grows over time as we're learning while we're doing.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Last question before I ask you all to wrap up, and then we'll go to some of the questions we've got coming through on the chat. So actually, it's not the last question. It's just the last question from me, if I'm being honest. So what does the future look like and this is, I suppose, following on what we've just said, what does the future look like for you, Teresa, where lived experience is a core part of mental health research in AI?
Um, I think that we as a team have been really wrestling with this tension that exists between the way the unregulated system deploys things into the wild, and that's gonna happen. We also have a lot of individuals who with lived experience who are coming us telling us how they're using AI that they have access to. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think that what for us as researchers who are building technology, it means that we recognize the importance of being at the table for the ethical build, right? So when safety issues come up in unregulated markets, then we're like, okay, well, we totally expected that to happen, but that will come after. So we're going to see this almost a ping-ponging, I think, the way the system is going to deploy technology, have people play with it, and there's going to be enormous risk for people, especially those with chronic conditions, right? Like, and so for us, when we think about creating ethical systems, that's enormously important in being at the table. So a bit of it is like a wait and see, keep an eye on the ground, hear how people are using technology. I think because that also, like, as we scaffold up technology, sometimes I find that we end up research typically is behind, is what I find, because as a system, research moves slower. Right? And so, we're kind of keeping an eye on the way that people already use technology that's available to them so that when we research is kind of pushed forward, we can make sure that research is catching up and providing knowledge, learning in a way that really then becomes super impactful. And I think those things are really important to kind of to ensure that the people who are at the highest risks, people who are not accessing services, people who are having the most complex, challenging problems, that those people are not left behind when we start to advance rapidly from a technological perspective.
Brilliant. And I guess that just echoes all the points already made, doesn't it? About rather than waiting for something to happen and then thinking how we involve people, how do we make sure that we're being preemptive, being proactive, and saying we know there are going to be concerns, ethical concerns, challenges that come up. How do we get a good dynamic, good infrastructure together so that when they do arise, we've already got people and collaborations in place that we can come and discuss and debate and think how to and problem solve with, that we're being proactive about that, those relationships and dynamics are being set up. Okay, I'm going to come to the questions in the chat shortly, but first I want you to go quickly, one sentence, 1 point each, and just to say, if there's one takeaway you'd like the, people to leave with today, what would it be? So just one short, snappy takeaway. I can see you've all just put your thinking face on. You've all just gone, oh. But Chan, I think I saw you come off mute, so I'm going to go to you first. Maybe you didn't come off mute. Maybe I'm just picking on you now. But
Yeah, start small and do it, commit to it, I think would be the snappy one.
brilliant. Who do you want to pass it to?
Oh, now I have the power.
Now you've got the power.
Teresa, do you want to go? 'Cause
I will say lean in and don't assume that, don't make assumptions, which is weird, right? But lean on what you know. So I would say one of the things that happens is sometimes we get so scared about what it means to bring these people in, we miss the fundamentals. Just let people know what you're researching. Stay true to what it is you're exploring. Let them know that, and then be along for the journey, because you'll be pleasantly surprised that we're gonna lean right in and then provide, I think, really awesome experience.
Great. Who are you going to pass it to?
Joy.
Thank you. So I think we've all heard the phrase, there can be nothing about us without us, right? And I think this basically is all about collaborative, respective partnerships towards genuine inclusion and empowerment. And I'll pass over to Ian.
Thanks, Joy. I agree with all the other panelists. I think adapt quickly, and adapt with lived experience, because if you don't move fast, you're going to be left behind. We all have that fear, but you can do that with lived experience. So learn fast and do it with lived experience.
Great. Excellent. Thank you all so much. So first of all, I'd just like to say from me, a massive thank you to all your contributions so far. But now we're going to go over just a sort of a few questions we've got coming through from the chat. So I think there's been some great discussions coming through there in the chat. Now, one question. Could the panelists say more about what upskilling of lived experience experts might look like? And I suppose that might be particularly relevant in this area. So anybody want to come through on this point? What does upskilling What can upskilling look like?
I am happy to start. And to my point I made just a moment ago, sometimes we think that when we bring people with lived experience into research, we need to give them research 101. But I often find that that becomes a distraction, and it's confusing for people with lived experience who were like, well, wait a minute. It's like you almost missed like just like staying rooted with your research project as a whole. So I would say if you bring in people with lived experience and they're part of your research team and you're meeting, just like you start, the best thing you can do is lean on what you know are best practices for project management. Like you're gonna have your kickoff call, does everybody know where we are on the timeline? I think sharing documents is really important. Sometimes we're unaware that again, because we're kind of afraid that maybe this is too technical, give people the opportunity to read a document, even if it seems technical, and share openly, I think is a really easy first practice because there's no risk in it. Give somebody those materials, let them chew on them, give them the time to understand, and then come back to questions like you would with any new collaborator. And that's if they weren't there from the start. Otherwise, if you're kind of coming to them with an idea, then upskilling looks like, hey, I have this idea. What's your sense of this idea? What is your understanding of how this proposal, might be improved based on what you know? And so you're not there, you don't have to train people per se on anything except unless they weren't included from the start. And if that's the case, then you need to basically bring them up to speed. And that's where the training needs to be focused.
I completely agree with that. It's a really good point. And I think going back to the point many of you made about that iterative learning, that let's give something a go, let's see how it went, what went well, what were the challenges. Often when you pick up about the challenges, you pick up from anybody in that team, not just lived experience experts, where gaps in knowledge have been, where there have been challenges about how we've worked together, where there's been misunderstandings perhaps, or where we just have different perspectives of concepts. And that's then allowed us to do, for example, at Welcome, we've done kind of shared sessions about actually, let's just take a pause and think about what do we really mean by this? How do we grapple with this concept? But that is not necessarily upskilling lived experience experts or upskilling the team. It's like, how are we learning together and problem solving it, always trying to think together about how we work better together. Anybody else want to come in on the upskilling question before I move on to the next one? Chan.
I'll add to that. One analogy I often use is, let's say an AI system is a building. We are the architect, and the people with lived experiences are people who will live in this building. They will, of course, if your building is designed unreasonably, people will change it. People will do weird things to try to make this environment work for them. But can we slowly build them up to such that they can do a little bit of renovation and perhaps even to change the system for themselves? But I think actually this relates to another question in the chat about like how to extent those folks can actually speak to things like bias in LLM training data. Like no, there are some bones and like structural and foundations of that building. We need to figure it out. And I think a lot of that goes to the regulation aspect, which I think I'm perhaps slightly more optimistic than some of the part of the conversation here. But I think that's how I think about upscaling. It always comes with this balance between what we do and, how can we build people up for changing the environment over time.
I love that analogy of the house and the renovations, etc. That's excellent. I'm going to use that one. Joy, Ian, anything to add on the upskilling question?
I think one of the things about lived experience and having that meaningfully involved is that you will have discussions, you will have engagement around topics that you all know you should be talking about, but somehow they're not on the agenda of your meetings or sort of things that you were saying, Kate. So I think it's the upskilling of the members of the team who don't identify as being lived experience. I think upskilling them is the important aspect, much more so. What you want is the authenticity. You don't want to make someone who has a lived experience into a researcher, into an epidemiologist, into a digital designer. That's not the point of why you're engaging them. So, but what you do need is we all work in our little specialities, and especially as we go through and our careers are structured to go up and up that ladder. So you need to create those environments where you can think multidisciplinary, where you can think about maybe that's not going to work. Maybe we've just missed a point there from something. So you need the space in the meetings. And if you have a meeting that's like bang, 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 5 minutes for each point, and you don't have that discussion, you're going to miss what you can get out of lived experience. So the upskilling, I feel, is the people with lived experience upskilling the people who might be specialists in other areas.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
To that emphasizing the reciprocity, whereby we get to learn from persons with lived experience and get to learn from us. So that mutual benefit goes a long way, and you'll realize you'll get much more out of it than looking at it as just upskilling them, because we are also learning a lot from them. So that element of reciprocity should be in place, and it would help us not look at it like, oh yeah, when they come in, you have to upskill them. It totally changes that element.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. There's another question about here that says, which I think might be one for me to kick off with, which is about the question is involvement in research projects proposal, is crucial, and the time to really understand, particularly in more technical subjects. So the question is, will Wellcome be looking to provide more funding and time in our course to sort of support and account for this? So I guess just to acknowledge, we're really aware that the involvement doesn't just start when people get the money for the proposal. So that is something we're looking at. We're trying to think more about how do we make sure that not only do we more than adequately fund lived experience collaboration in the research proposals that we review. So just so you all know, what we look for is, does the budget, does the setup for lived experience, and certainly the costings, does that match the aim and ambition of the project? And we really want to make sure that that's feasible, because if it's too little, it's tokenistic, it's not going to work. So we're really looking at, does that match the aim and ambition? I appreciate that only comes in though once the project has started. We're also starting to think about what we can help instigate more systemically to look at. We know that some research institutions, some organisations have really good internal infrastructure, embedded lived experience infrastructure that helps researchers, others developing design in projects proposals to collaborate with lived experience experts from the start. And so what we're looking at thinking about is, how do we understand what those best practices are? How do we help share those practices around so that more organizations, institutions have that embedded infrastructure? So it doesn't just rely on project by project, that actually organizations themselves become more inclusive and have that early setup. So we're just trying to think about what that looks like. So yes, the answer is we are thinking about it. Watch this space, keep an eye out. Just the other thing in terms of this particular piece of work for the accelerator is that we understand that there is funding available to support people to take part in the accelerator program. So for people who we understand that a lot of lived experience experts, for example, aren't going to be able to do this as part of an established substantial paid role. So for people who are not don't have can't take part in the accelerator because they're not salaried as part of another position, you can apply for funding to support that. So please do sign up on the platform. You'll be able to get more information there from that. So I think that's a critical thing there. One more question I think we've got, maybe two, but one more question I'll get to is, this is a good one. Well, they're all good, but to what extent can lived experience collaboration mitigate inherent problems with AI models, e.e. bias in LLM training data, or sort of lack of digital access, literacy, etc.? So how do we make sure, to what extent can lived experience involvement mitigate some of these inherent challenges we know exist in AI models? Who wants to jump on that one?
I'll offer a bad answer and then folks can build upon it. I think depending on what you do with LE involvement, one thing I want to point out is stakeholder participation of minority experiences is not only a standard method in human-centered AI system design, it's also a standard method in policymaking. So one thing that we try to do, and I think are getting more traction now, is when you engage with stakeholders beyond proposing, here's a system, here's a computer thing that you can design that would help them. Are there policies that people would also like to see that would really ensure they benefit from it. And by policy, I don't just mean big P policy like laws, but also can be like how the doctors should use this system, or how does the school or hospital use this system, like by designing infrastructures around the technology. I think that can sort of amplify the power, to amplify the influence of LE engagement. But this is a question I'm very curious about what other panelists think also.
I'll add just a couple of anecdotes, right? So like when we were looking at AI language, at the very easiest level, it's like we were creating tools and AI isn't everywhere, right? Because human labor is important, especially in recovery, but we also know that there are stuck points. So what lived experience kind of helped to figure out at the very start was like, where do I want to keep what I need to work through? But where and how can AI be integrated to assist me in the same way that maybe a therapist would, but I can't afford it, to help me move along in this journey, nudge me in the right way. So, like, lived experience was there to mitigate like proper use, right? And engagement strategies. But then on another side, we also were there kind of reading transcripts and like helping to code. And I think that that was a learning experience. So our researchers were really awesome. They're like, all right, let's just jump right in. Like, we don't, you're not classically trained or whatever, but we're just going to do this. And it was really awesome. We're like, at some of the basic level, we're like, wow, that AI that we got for whatever cost we got it at sounds like it like totally paternalistic. That's not going to work. But that wasn't just mental health specific, right? That was just a glaring age problem that having more people in the mix kind of highlights some of the challenges with the language models that we were playing with. But then I think you really get into the meat and kind of really start to see, okay, how are we as lived experience experts kind of giving researchers input about ambivalence? Like, I'm reading the transcripts. I see ambivalence where and fear where maybe a researcher doesn't even know or how to interpret what they're reading in a transcript. And so this is how examples of how we've mitigated some of the problems. It's just like our lived experience. We can just see things quicker. To Ian's point, it allows me to move forward with efficacy and meaning and in a really beautiful way.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Does anybody else
Um,
want to come in on that? Oh, Ian, over to you.
I was just devil's advocate. I don't think that lived experience involvement in itself can fix bad AI or can fix problematic AI. Um, so how it might contribute is that we're transparent in how we listen and how we engage with the diversity of opinion around what our governance model is, what the fears are. But that really depends on what we just heard, is that we do deeply listen to what those concerns are. Um, One of the things that's going to come out, I think, from any deep engagement with lived experience is this is not all about the digital. People with lived experience are going to say, I am open-minded. I may be ambivalent, but I'm willing to engage in this as long as all of these other things, which are more person-centered or in other parts of the health system or support system are happening. So what that means for people working in the sector is you may need to be supporters and advocates for these other things to happen for a fair and equitable mental health system, as well as supporting your AI technology. You may need to do that, and you may need to demonstrate that to build support and to build trust. So for people to have options as they go through, so you need to. I think lived experience in itself, simply having your panel or even having lived experience researchers, is not going to fix the problem if you've got a problem which is a bad problem.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to draw us to a close there. But before I do, just want to check, was there anything else any burning things any of our panelists wanted to say before I wrap us up? Amazing. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say once again a massive thank you to all for joining me. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I could go on all afternoon. I won't, but just say a massive thank you. I think this is such an exciting area to really be thinking about how we really bring together different forms of knowledge, expertise, and insight. So it's been great chatting with you all today. Thank you so much for your contributions, and looking forward to staying connected with you all. And thank you to everyone joining the call as well. It's really exciting to be with you and to really see about how we can advance lived experience involvement in such an exciting area. And with that, I shall pass us back to Courtney. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And just a huge thank you to all of our panelists. So thank you, Teresa, Joy, Chan, and Ian. That was a really awesome and engaging discussion. I'm here to quickly close us out. So just again, Bradley introduced it, but please join our MEXA platform. This is a great place to continue these conversations and to connect with people that are also passionate about this issue. We have a couple upcoming events that we would love to see you at. We have our second hackathon focusing on interventions. The sign-up deadline is this Friday, the 17th, so I really encourage you to get your registration added. You can find the link to registration on the MEXA app as well as on all our social media platforms. You can register as an individual or as part of a team. If you come as an individual, we'll get you added to a team so you can, again, meet a lot of new people in this space. We also will have an additional event February 12th. This one will be focusing on fine-tuning AI models, specifically in the context of mental health research. So we hope you join us for that as well. More information to come on that one. Finally, I wanted to share a little bit about our research accelerator. You heard Bradley talk about it, you heard Kate talk about it a little bit. We will be launching this hopefully in the next couple months and have a lot more information for you at the end of this month. The focus of this is really to bring together research teams to create a really awesome proposal for some exclusive funding that the Wellcome Trust is offering specifically around mental health and AI. So stay tuned for this. We're excited to be able to support researchers, and I feel like speaking to kind of some of the questions that were happening, this funding will be able to support your team's involvement of lived experience experts. So thinking about making sure that we're prioritizing funding and creating time for that very important task, this accelerator kind of centers that and really makes sure that we are thinking about that. So stay tuned for more information on that. And finally, we are a data-driven and continuous improvement organization. So if you could please take a minute to take a quick survey for us. We will also send this out via email, but I would really appreciate it as we continue to create new events, as we continue to kind of do more things with MEXA as the website. We really want your involvement and your kind of input on that. So I will also put that link in the chat quickly. But yes, again, just thank you to everyone. We're really grateful for your attendance. As you know, this event was recorded. I will go ahead and get the recording up on YouTube, so it'll be accessible via the MEXA app and through our social media accounts. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.